Chapter 19, in which Passepartout takes too great an interest in his master, and what comes of it. Hong Kong is an island which came into possession of the English by the Treaty of Nankin after the War of 1842, and the colonizing genius of the English has created upon it an important city and excellent port. The island is situated at the mouth of the Canton River and is separated by about 60 miles from the Portuguese town of Macau, on the opposite coast. Hong Kong has beaten Macau in the struggle for the Chinese trade, and now the greater part of the transportation of Chinese goods finds its depot in the former place. Docks, hospitals, wharves, a Gothic cathedral, a government house, macadamized streets give to Hong Kong the appearance of a town in Kent or Surrey, transferred by some strange magic to the Antipodes. Passepartout wandered with his hands in his pockets toward the Victoria port, gazing as he went at the curious palanquins and other modes of conveyance, and the groups of Chinese, Japanese, and Europeans who passed to and fro in the streets. Hong Kong seemed to him not unlike Bombay, Calcutta, and Singapore, since, like them, it betrayed everywhere the evidence of English supremacy. At the Victoria port he found a confused mass of ships of all nations. English, French, American, and Dutch, men of war and trading vessels, Japanese and Chinese junks, sempas, tankas, and flower boats, which formed so many floating pateres. Passepartout noticed in the crowd a number of natives who seemed very old and were dressed in yellow. On going into a barber's to get shaved, he learned that these ancient men were all at least 80 years old, at which age they are permitted to wear yellow, which is the imperial color. Passepartout, without exactly knowing why, thought this very funny. On reaching the quay where they were to embark on the Carnatic, he was not astonished to find Fix walking up and down. The detective seemed very much disturbed and disappointed. "This is bad," muttered Passepartout, "for the gentlemen of the Reform Club." He accosted Fix with a merry smile, as if he had not perceived that gentleman's chagrin. The detective had indeed good reasons to inveigh against the bad luck which pursued him. The warrant had not come. It was certainly on the way, but as certainly it could not now reach Hong Kong for several days, and this being the last English territory on Mr. Fogg's route, the robber would escape unless he could manage to detain him. "Well, Monsieur Fix," said Passepartout, "have you decided to go with us as far as America?" "Yes," returned Fix through his set teeth. "Good," exclaimed Passepartout, laughing heartily. "I knew you could not persuade yourself to separate from us. Come and engage your berth." They entered the steamer office and secured cabins for 4 persons. The clerk, as he gave them the tickets, informed them that, the repairs on the Carnatic having been completed, the steamer would leave that very evening, and not the next morning, as had been announced. "That will suit my master all the better," said Passepartout. "I will go and let him know." Fix now decided to make a bold move. He resolved to tell Passepartout all. It seemed to be the only possible means of keeping Phileas Fogg several days longer at Hong Kong. He accordingly invited his companion into a tavern which caught his eye on the quay. On arriving, they found themselves in a large room handsomely decorated, at the end of which was a large camp bed furnished with cushions. Several persons lay upon this bed in a deep sleep. At small tables which were arranged about the room, some 30 customers were drinking English beer, porter, gin, and brandy, smoking, the while, long red clay pipes stuffed with little balls of opium mingled with the essence of rose. From time to time one of the smokers, overcome with the narcotic, would slip under the table, whereupon the waiters, taking him by the head and feet, carried him and laid him in the bed. The bed already supported 20 of these stupefied sots. Fix and Passepartout saw that they were in a smoking house, haunted by those wretched, cadaverous, idiotic creatures to whom the English merchants sell every year the miserable drug called opium, to the amount of £1,400,000, thousands devoted to one of the most despicable vices which afflict humanity. The Chinese government has in vain attempted to deal with the evil by stringent laws. It passed gradually from the rich, to whom it was at first exclusively reserved, to the lower classes, and then its ravages could not be arrested. Opium is smoked everywhere, at all times, by men and women in the Celestial Empire, and once accustomed to it, the victims cannot dispense with it, except by suffering horrible bodily contortions and agonies. A great smoker can smoke as many as 8 pipes a day, but he dies in 5 years. It was in one of these dens that Fix and Passepartout, in search of a friendly glass, found themselves. Passepartout had no money, but willingly accepted Fix's invitation in the hope of returning the obligation at some future time. They ordered 2 bottles of port, to which the Frenchman did ample justice, while Fix observed him with close attention. They chatted about the journey, and Passepartout was especially merry at the idea that Fix was going to continue with them. When the bottles were empty, however, he rose to go and tell his master of the change of the time and the sailing of the Carnatic. Fix caught him by an arm and said, "Wait a moment." "What for, Mr. Fix? I want to have a serious talk with you." "A serious talk?" cried Passepartout, drinking up the little wine that was left in the bottom of his glass. "Well, we'll talk about it tomorrow. I haven't time now. Stay, what I have to say concerns your master." Passepartout, at this, looked attentively at his companion. Fix's face seemed to have a singular expression. He resumed his seat. "What is it that you have to say?" Fix placed his hand upon Passepartout's arm, and lowering his voice said, "You have guessed who I am." "Parbleu," said Passepartout, smiling. "Then I'm going to tell you everything." "Now that I know everything, my friend, that's very good, but go on. First, though, let me tell you that those gentlemen have put themselves to a useless expense." "Useless?" said Fix. "You speak confidently. It's clear you don't know how large the sum is." "Of course I do," returned Passepartout. 20,000 pounds. 55,000, answered Fix, pressing his companion's hand. "What?" cried Passepartout. "Has Monsieur Fogg dared 55,000 pounds? Well, there's all the more reason for not losing an instant," he continued, getting up hastily. Fix pushed Passepartout back in his chair and resumed. 55,000 pounds, and if I succeed, I get 2,000 pounds. If you help me, I'll let you have 500 of them." "Help you?" cried Passepartout, whose eyes were standing wide open. "Yes, help me keep Mr. Fogg here for 2 or 3 days. Why, what are you saying? Those gentlemen are not satisfied with following my master and suspecting his honor, but they must try to put obstacles in his way? I blush for them." "What do you mean?" "I mean this is a piece of shameful trickery. They might as well waylay Mr. Fogg and put his money in their pockets." "That's just what we count on doing." "It's conspiracy, then," cried Passepartout, who became more and more excited as the liquor mounted in his head, for he drank without perceiving it. "A real conspiracy, and gentlemen, too. Bah!" Fix began to be puzzled. "Members of the Reform Club," continued Passepartout, "you must know, Monsieur Fix, that my master is an honest man, and that when he makes a wager, he tries to win it fairly." "But who do you think I am?" asked Fix, looking at him intently. "Parbleu, an agent of the members of the Reform Club, sent out here to interrupt my master's journey. But though I found you out some time ago, I've taken good care to say nothing about it to Mr. Fogg." "He knows nothing, then?" "Nothing," replied Passepartout, again emptying his glass. The detective passed his hand across his forehead, hesitating before he spoke again. What should he do? Passepartout's mistake seemed sincere, but it made his design more difficult. It was evident that the servant was not the master's accomplice, as Fix had been inclined to suspect. "Well," said the detective to himself, "as he is not an accomplice, he will help me." He had no time to lose. Fogg must be detained at Hong Kong, so he resolved to make a clean breast of it. "Listen to me," said Fix abruptly. "I am not, as you think, an agent of the members of the Reform Club." "Bah!" retorted Passepartout with an air of raillery. "I am a police detective sent out here by the London office." "You, a detective?" "I'll prove it. Here's my commission." Passepartout was speechless with astonishment when Fix displayed this document, the genuineness of which could not be doubted. "Mr. Fogg's wager," resumed Fix, "is only a pretext, of which you and the gentlemen of the Reform are dupes. He had a motive for securing your innocent complicity. But why? Listen, on the 28th of last September, a robbery of 55,000 pounds was committed at the Bank of England, by a person whose description was fortunately secured. Here is his description. It answers exactly to that of Mr. Phileas Fogg." "What nonsense!" cried Passepartout, striking the table with his fist. "My master is the most honorable of men." "How can you tell? You know scarcely anything about him. He went into his service the day he came away. He came away on a foolish pretext, without trunks, and carrying a large amount in banknotes. And yet you are bold enough to assert that he is an honest man. Yes, yes, replied the poor fellow mechanically. Would you like to be arrested as his accomplice? Passepartout, overcome by what he had heard, held his head between his hands and did not dare to look at the detective. Phileas Fogg, the savior of Aoda, that brave and generous man, a robber? Yet how many presumptions were there against him? Passepartout essayed to reject the suspicions which forced themselves upon his mind. He did not wish to believe that his master was guilty. Well, what do you want of me? He said at last with an effort. See here, replied Fix, I have tracked Mr. Fogg to this place, but as yet I have failed to receive the warrant of arrest for which I sent to London. You must help me keep him here in Hong Kong. I will share with you the £2,000 reward offered by the Bank of England. Never, replied Passepartout, who tried to rise but fell back, exhausted in body and mind. Mr. Fix, he stammered, even should what you say be true, if my master really is the robber you are seeking, for which I deny, I am in his service. I have seen his generosity and his goodness. I will never betray him, not for all the gold in the world. I come from a village where they don't eat that kind of bread. You refuse? I refuse. Consider that I've said nothing, said Fix, and let us drink. Yes, let us drink. Passepartout felt himself yielding more and more to the effects of the liquor. Fix, seeing that he must, at all hazards, be separated from his master, wished to entirely overcome him. Some pipes full of opium lay upon the table. Fix slipped one into Passepartout's hand. He took it, put his between his lips, lit it, drew several puffs, and his head, becoming heavy under the influence of the narcotic, fell upon the table. At last, said Fix, seeing Passepartout unconscious, Mr. Fogg will not be informed of the Carnatic's departure, and if he is, he will have to go without this cursed Frenchman. And, after paying his bill, Fix left the tavern. This is the end of chapter 19, and man, that is some dirty pool. Just taking out poor Passepartout like that, pretending to be a friend. Though admittedly, Passepartout should have known a little bit better, should have been a little bit more in control. Hong Kong was an English colony up until 23 years ago, late 90s. It went back over to China. It was actually kind of interesting the way it was. There was Hong Kong proper, which was an English colony, and then there was this whole area around Hong Kong which they had a 99-year lease on. So England had a 99-year lease on this area around Hong Kong, and then you had Hong Kong proper. And when the 99-year lease ran up, all of this area which supported Hong Kong, because Hong Kong was this major metropolis, and you need water, you need power, you need all sorts of, you need water, power, sewer, things like that to run a city. But all of that stuff was in the surrounding area around Hong Kong. So in order to, you can't really run the city without the water and the power and the sewer. So they realized that they wouldn't have the water, the power, the sewer, and they're like, well, we'll just give you all of Hong Kong back now because we can't support it. So that was Hong Kong getting handed back. It really is amazing how cities around the world can just look so much the same. I've been to South Africa, and Johannesburg, it could be New York, it could be Chicago, it could be wherever, except it's dry, so it's probably more like LA, but, well, not LA. Sure. Anyway, major cities just feel like major cities, and it's like you walk into a McDonald's, and a McDonald's is a McDonald's is a McDonald's, which is why when you're traveling the world, you don't go to McDonald's unless you're feeling homesick. But anyway, so that was Hong Kong. Opium. They mentioned the War of 1848, which was actually about opium, because England was selling opium and China was trying to ban it, and England was making lots of money off of it. And Queen Victoria was the OG drug lord. She was the original gangster drug lord. Made huge amounts of money off of the opium trade. But that's a little bit of hidden history there. But chapter 19. Will they make it out of Hong Kong in time?